Before we begin, take a quiet second and ask yourself one honest question. If power was placed in your hands today, would you remain the same person tomorrow? If this kind of deep reflection speaks to you, then stay with me till the end, and if you truly care about understanding the rise and fall of nations through the lens of faith, history, and human weakness, then make sure you are part of this journey, because what we uncover today is not just history, it is a mirror. The Torah warns in Deuteronomy that when a people enter prosperity and their herds multiply and their silver and gold increase, then their heart may become lifted up and they forget the Lord who brought them out of bondage. The Bible in the book of Proverbs declares that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. The Quran in Surah Al-Alaq reminds mankind that indeed man transgresses when he sees himself self-sufficient. 3 Revelations, 3 eras, 1 warning. When power meets desire and is fueled by arrogance, moral decay begins. Moral decay does not start with chaos in the streets. It begins in the unseen corners of the heart. It begins when gratitude turns into entitlement. When responsibility turns into control. When leadership turns into domination. Communities do not collapse in a single night. They rot slowly from within. The pillars weaken long before the roof falls. There was a time in history when certain civilizations believed they were chosen beyond accountability. Their armies were strong. Their treasuries were full. Their enemies were silent. But something invisible had already begun. Leaders stopped listening. Justice became selective. Truth became negotiable. Immorality became flexible. Power on its own is not evil. Desire on its own is not evil. Confidence is not evil. But when power is mixed with uncontrolled desire and protected by arrogance, the combination becomes toxic. It creates a system where correction is rejected, advice is mocked, and humility is seen as weakness. Look at Pharaoh in the Quran. He did not begin by claiming divinity. He began as a ruler. But power extended over time without accountability reshaped his identity. He said, "I am your Lord Most High." That is not just a political statement. That is the final stage of moral decay. When a leader no longer sees himself as servant of God or guardian of people but as the ultimate authority. Look at King Saul in the Bible. Chosen with humility, anointed with promise, yet as insecurity and desire for control grew, he disobeyed divine command to preserve his image before the people. Pride clouded obedience, and the kingdom was taken from him. Look at Qarun in the Quran, known for his immense wealth. He did not deny God openly at first. He simply claimed that his success was due to his own knowledge. Wealth produced arrogance. Arrogance produced distance from truth. And the earth swallowed him along with his treasures. These are not isolated stories. They are patterns. Patterns of how moral decay unfolds in stages. First stage is comfort. When a community survives hardship, it becomes grateful. But when comfort continues for generations, gratitude fades. The next generation inherits stability but does not remember sacrifice. They begin to believe that prosperity is normal and permanent. Second stage is entitlement. Leaders and elites begin to see resources as personal property. Positions become privileges rather than responsibilities. Laws begin to bend for the powerful. Justice becomes slower for the rich and harsher for the weak. Third stage is normalization of corruption. What was once shameful becomes acceptable. What was once secret becomes public. People begin to say this is just how the system works. And when corruption becomes culture, reform becomes rebellion. Fourth stage is arrogance at the top and despair at the bottom. The powerful no longer fear consequences. The weak no longer expect fairness. At this stage, moral decay has infected every layer. But here is the deeper truth. Communities fail on multiple levels because corruption never stays confined to one area. Political corruption influences economic injustice. Economic injustice fuels social anger. Social anger destroys trust. And once trust collapses, institutions follow. Power without moral restraint becomes oppression. Desire without discipline becomes exploitation. Arrogance without humility becomes blindness. In the Torah, the Israelites were repeatedly warned not to forget the covenant when entering the land of abundance. Forgetfulness was not intellectual, it was moral. Forgetting meant living as if there would be no accountability. In the Bible, the Roman Empire at its height displayed unmatched organization, military dominance, and engineering brilliance. Yet historians note that internal moral decline, excessive luxury, political betrayal, and erosion of civic virtue weakened it from within long before external enemies delivered the final blows. In the Quran, Allah describes nations stronger than the Arabs of the Prophet time who were destroyed because of injustice and corruption. Their architecture was grand, their power was visible, but their morality had collapsed. So what truly destroys a community? It is not poverty alone. Many poor societies survive with dignity. It is not external enemies alone. Many nations face threats and remain united. It is when internal moral systems collapse. Leadership plays a central role. A leader sets the tone. When a leader fears God, values justice, and surrounds himself with truth-tellers, the society has protection. But when a leader fears losing power more than losing integrity, he begins to remove anyone who speaks truth. Slowly he builds an echo chamber. And in an echo chamber, arrogance grows unchecked. Desire intensifies the problem. Desire for wealth. Desire for recognition. Desire for dominance. Desire is powerful because it feels justified. A leader may say, I deserve this reward. I worked hard. I sacrificed. I built this nation. And slowly self-justification replaces accountability. Arrogance then seals the fate. Arrogance rejects advice. Arrogance mocks critics. Arrogance reinterprets warning signs as jealousy. When prophets came to ancient nations, their primary message was simple. Worship God alone and do not spread corruption. Yet the elite responded with ridicule. They said, we are superior. We are advanced. We are untouchable. And that word untouchable is dangerous. Every empire that believed it was untouchable eventually faced reality. But moral decay is not limited to rulers. Communities participate. When people celebrate unethical success. When they admire wealth without questioning its source. When they remain silent in the face of injustice because it does not affect them directly, they become partners in decline. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned that when people see and do not stop it with their hand or tongue or heart, then collective consequences may follow. The Bible teaches that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Small corruption spreads. The Torah repeatedly emphasizes communal responsibility. So decay is collective. It is layered. It is gradual. Consider how media influence shapes desire. When luxury is glorified beyond balance. When moral boundaries are mocked as outdated. When modesty is seen as weakness and shamelessness as confidence, cultural values shift. The next generation grows up redefining right and wrong. Educational systems also play a role. When knowledge is separated from ethics, intelligence grows without wisdom. A society may produce brilliant engineers and economists yet fail to produce just leaders. Economic imbalance further accelerates decay. When wealth is concentrated in few hands, opportunities shrink for many. Resentment grows. Crime increases. Trust declines. The powerful respond with more control rather than reform. The cycle tightens. Arrogance prevents course correction. History shows that many collapsing empires received warning signs decades before downfall. Financial crises, social unrest, moral scandals. Yet leaders dismissed them as temporary noise. Why? Because arrogance whispers that decline happens to others, not to us. The Quran narrates the story of the people of Ad who said, "Who is stronger than us?" Strength blinded them. The Bible describes Babylon boasting in its glory before sudden humiliation. The Torah records repeated cycles where disobedience led to exile. 3 traditions, 1 lesson. No civilization is above moral law. Now pause and reflect. Are the signs visible in our time? Is power centralized without accountability? Is desire celebrated without discipline? Is arrogance defended as confidence? This episode is not about pointing fingers at one nation or one era. It is about understanding a universal law. Moral decay is predictable when power, desire, and arrogance align. But here is hope. If decay has stages, then reform also has stages. The same way corruption spreads gradually, righteousness can be rebuilt intentionally. Power unchecked, desire undisciplined, arrogance unchallenged. Together they form the silent architecture of collapse. Now we go deeper. Because moral decay does not remain spiritual for long. It transforms into systems. It hardens into institutions. It rewrites laws. And once corruption becomes structural, it is far more difficult to reverse. The decay of a community begins in the heart, but it survives through structures. When leaders lose humility, the first thing they alter is accountability. Transparency becomes selective. Oversight becomes symbolic. Advisors who once spoke truth are replaced by loyalists who speak comfort. Slowly, a culture of fear replaces a culture of honesty. In the Quran, Allah describes how Pharaoh divided his people into factions, weakening some and empowering others. Division is not always accidental. It can be strategic. A divided society is easier to control. When people fight each other, they stop questioning the top. The Bible records how King Rehoboam ignored the wise counsel of elders and chose instead the harsh advice of his peers. The result was national division. Pride fractured a united kingdom. The Torah repeatedly commands judges not to show favoritism neither to the poor nor to the mighty. Justice must remain balanced. But when moral decay enters institutions, justice bends toward influence. This is the institutional stage of corruption. At this stage, laws still exist. Courts still operate. Elections may still happen. But the spirit of justice weakens. Outcomes become predictable based on power, not principle. Economic structures begin to reflect the same decay. Wealth accumulation is no longer a byproduct of service. It becomes the primary goal. Corporations seek profit without ethical restraint. Workers are treated as numbers. The gap between rich and poor widens until it becomes visible in everyday life. History shows that extreme inequality often precedes instability. In late Rome, massive estates concentrated wealth among elites while ordinary citizens struggled. In pre-revolutionary France, luxury of the aristocracy stood in sharp contrast to hunger among peasants. Desire detached from responsibility creates imbalance. Arrogance prevents correction. Elites begin to believe their privilege is proof of superiority. They reinterpret success as moral validation. If we are wealthy, we must be right. If we are powerful, we must be deserving. This mindset blinds them to warning signs. Moral decay also affects family structures. When leadership fails at the top, the ripple moves downward. Families lose moral anchors. Parents overwhelmed by material pursuit have less time for character formation. Children grow in environments rich in comfort but poor in discipline. Desire becomes normalized from early age. Instant gratification replaces patience. Fame replaces service. Visibility replaces virtue. The Quran describes nations destroyed not only for disbelief but for spreading corruption openly. When sin becomes celebrated rather than hidden, moral immunity weakens. The Bible warns that when people call evil good and good evil, confusion spreads across generations. The Torah emphasizes teaching commandments diligently to children so that memory remains alive. When memory fades, identity weakens. And when identity weakens, moral boundaries blur. Another critical factor in societal decay is the distortion of truth. Truth is the foundation of trust. When leaders manipulate information to protect image rather than pursue justice, credibility erodes. Media may become an instrument of narrative rather than truth. Propaganda replaces transparency. Once truth becomes flexible, people stop believing institutions. Conspiracy thinking increases. Polarization deepens. Each group lives in its own version of reality. Unity becomes impossible. Power uses desire to control narratives. Desire for approval, desire for influence, desire for dominance over public perception. Arrogance justifies it. We know better than the people. They cannot handle the full truth. But history repeatedly shows that suppressed truth eventually explodes. Consider how internal corruption weakens national defense. When promotions are based on loyalty rather than merit, competence declines. When contracts are awarded through favoritism, resources are wasted. An army may appear strong outwardly but internally it is fragile. The Quran reminds that Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. External protection cannot compensate for internal decay. The Bible illustrates this in the story of Samson. Physically strong yet morally compromised. His personal weakness eventually led to national vulnerability. Strength without discipline collapses. At the societal level, entertainment can also become a distraction from decline. Bread and circuses in Rome kept people entertained while political decay accelerated. Pleasure numbs awareness. Desire keeps citizens occupied. Arrogance convinces leaders that distraction equals stability. But distraction does not equal durability. There is also the danger of moral relativism. When right and wrong become entirely subjective, every action can be justified. Without fixed moral reference, leadership decisions become driven by convenience rather than conscience. The three scriptures emphasize accountability beyond human systems. The Torah speaks of covenant responsibility. The Bible emphasizes final judgment. The Quran repeatedly reminds of the day when every deed will be presented. When belief in accountability weakens, earthly power feels absolute. Another layer of decay appears in how societies treat the vulnerable. The poor, the orphan, the stranger, the minority. In all three traditions, protection of the weak is a measure of moral health. When the vulnerable become expendable, moral collapse is advanced. Pharaoh enslaved. Roman elites exploited. Pre-exile Israel neglected widows and orphans. The pattern is clear. Arrogance dehumanizes. Desire rationalizes. Power enforces. But moral decay is never permanent by default. It becomes permanent only when repentance and reform are rejected. How can leaders prevent this collapse? First, they must internalize humility. True leadership begins with awareness that authority is a trust, not ownership. Moses, despite confronting Pharaoh, remained humble before God. Prophet Muhammad, despite leading a growing state, lived simply and accepted criticism. Biblical prophets confronted kings, reminding them of divine law. Second, they must build systems that outlive personalities. Transparent institutions, independent courts, clear succession mechanisms, public accountability forums. When systems are strong, individual weakness does less damage. Third, they must cultivate moral education, teaching history honestly including failures, encouraging ethical debate, promoting service over celebrity. Fourth, they must control desire before desire controls them, setting limits on wealth accumulation, preventing concentration of unchecked power, encouraging simplicity at the top. Fifth, they must welcome correction, surrounding themselves with advisors who are not afraid to disagree, creating channels where citizens can speak without fear. Communities also carry responsibility. Citizens must value integrity more than spectacle. They must reward honesty at ballot and marketplace. They must refuse to glorify unethical success. If people demand righteousness, leaders adjust. If people reward corruption, leaders adapt to that too. Moral decay is therefore both vertical and horizontal. It moves from top to bottom and from bottom to top simultaneously. There is a critical moment in every civilization when reform is still possible. When warning signs are visible but collapse has not yet occurred. That moment requires courage. Courage to admit failure. Courage to change direction. Courage to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term stability. In Surah Hud, the Quran narrates how prophets called their people for years before consequences arrived. Delay was mercy. Warning was opportunity. The Bible describes Nineveh repenting after warning and temporarily avoiding destruction. The Torah recounts moments when sincere return restored blessing. This means decay is not destiny. It is choice reinforced over time. Now reflect again. If power, desire, and arrogance are present, what small steps could reverse their influence? What habits could leaders adopt today to prevent tomorrow collapse? We have traced the arc of moral decay from the individual heart to institutions, from desire to arrogance, from small compromises to systemic collapse. In this final part, we shift our focus to solutions, practical, spiritual, and structural. Because knowledge alone does not save societies. Action does. Awareness must transform into safeguards, and reflection into practice. The first principle of building moral immunity is personal accountability. Every member of a community, from leader to citizen, must measure actions not just against law, but against conscience. In the Torah, the repeated exhortation is, "You shall not follow the majority to do evil." Morality is not a popularity contest. In the Bible, Proverbs warns that integrity preserves the upright, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their own actions. The Quran emphasizes that every soul is responsible for its deeds. Communities rise and fall based on collective adherence to these truths. Leaders must embrace humility as strategic strength. Humility is not weakness. It is recognition that power is a trust. Moses faced Pharaoh with authority but never with ego. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, led a growing state while maintaining personal modesty. The Bible recounts Joseph, a man of great influence in Egypt, who acknowledged that wisdom and success came from God. When leaders remain servants of justice, desire is tempered, and arrogance finds no home. Institutional resilience is the next layer. Strong communities do not rely on the moral perfection of a single individual. They build transparent systems, independent oversight, and mechanisms that survive leadership change. Checks and balances are not optional. They are essential. In Roman times, when offices became hereditary or bought rather than earned, decay accelerated. The Quran stresses that societal justice must not depend on one ruler, but on shared responsibility and collective enforcement. Education and moral formation act as vaccines against decay. A society that educates its youth purely in technical skills but neglects ethical reasoning produces brilliant minds with fragile integrity. Torah commands repeated teaching of laws to children. Bible emphasizes instructing youth in righteousness. Quran stresses reflective learning, where knowledge is coupled with action. Communities that neglect character formation invite disaster. Economic justice is inseparable from moral health. Desire unchecked in wealth concentration leads to exploitation, resentment, and eventual instability. Leaders and citizens alike must cultivate a culture where success is measured by contribution, not by accumulation. In pre-revolutionary France, wealth hoarded by few while many starved created conditions for violent upheaval. The Quran explicitly condemns hoarding and calls for charity and fairness in trade. Transparency and truth must replace propaganda and manipulation. Arrogance thrives when truth is hidden. Fear of accountability allows leaders to rationalize corruption. Citizens must demand clarity and honesty. Media and institutions of communication must promote accountability, not sedate the populace with spectacle. The Bible reminds us that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Minor deceptions escalate into systemic decay. Community vigilance complements leadership reform. Citizens must not be passive observers. When injustice is tolerated silently, decay accelerates. Torah insists on communal responsibility. The Bible encourages rebuke of wrongdoing. The Quran advocates for enjoining good and forbidding evil. A society that celebrates ethical courage strengthens its immunity. Spiritual anchoring provides the ultimate safeguard. Faith reminds humans of accountability beyond the temporal realm. When belief in divine justice is internalized, power is checked by conscience, desire is disciplined by principle, and arrogance is humbled by awareness of higher authority. The Torah, Bible, and Quran consistently teach that moral integrity transcends wealth, position, and public approval. Consider modern parallels. Societies with transparent institutions, strong civic education, accountable leaders, and engaged citizens remain resilient in crises. Societies that neglect these components become vulnerable, even when militarily or technologically advanced. Moral decay is silent but lethal. Its progression is subtle until collapse appears sudden. Practical steps for individuals include self-reflection, resisting entitlement, holding leaders accountable, mentoring younger generations in ethics, and prioritizing service over gain. For communities, steps include designing fair legal systems, promoting ethical leadership, ensuring social safety nets, regulating economic inequality, fostering open dialogue, and embedding moral education in schools and culture. Leaders must actively invite criticism. Arrogance dies in the presence of honest counsel. Desire is tempered when advisors are truthful. Power is held responsibly when systems enforce accountability. Historical examples reinforce this. Nations that survived internal crises often had rulers willing to listen, to adjust, and to implement reforms before collapse became inevitable. The final lesson is stark yet hopeful. Moral decay is predictable, identifiable, and reversible, if recognized early. Power, desire, and arrogance are universal human temptations. Every generation faces them. Every leader encounters them. Every citizen participates in their societal expression. Awareness alone is not sufficient. Conscious action is required at both personal and communal levels. As you reflect on these lessons, ask yourself, what role do I play in the moral health of my community? Am I complicit in corruption by silence? Am I part of the solution by promoting justice, truth, and humility? Even small choices ripple outward. Individual integrity reinforces collective stability. Arrogance avoided at one level restrains its spread through institutions. Desire balanced by discipline shapes sustainable prosperity. History, sacred texts, and contemporary societies all converge on this truth. The rise and fall of communities is not random. It is guided by human moral choices. Decay is preventable. Collapse is not inevitable. And salvation, whether for a nation or a community, begins with awareness, accountability, and action. Before we conclude, a friendly reminder: if this exploration speaks to you, share it. Discuss it. Apply it. Let the wisdom of centuries guide your choices. Communities may fall silently, but awareness can build fortresses stronger than walls. Power restrained, desire disciplined, arrogance humbled. That is the foundation for enduring stability. In our next episode, we will examine case studies of moral revival, where societies managed to reverse decline and build resilience against corruption. We will see that it is never too late to act, but inaction has irreversible consequences. Remember, history is not merely a story of what happened. It is a blueprint. The Torah, Bible, and Quran provide guidance. Now it is up to you, individually and collectively, to translate understanding into action. Stay vigilant, stay humble, and let moral awareness guide every decision.